Well, it looks like we're all here, so we'll go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you all and thank David Taylor for organizing this. He's not here to introduce me because he is home, as one should be when they are sick with the flu. My name is Miranda Swanson. I'm the Dean of Students in the Physical Sciences Division and the moderator for today's discussion. Our discussion today is titled Leveraging a Postdoc in the Sciences. We have a wonderful, diverse group of panelists here who I will introduce in just a moment. Each panelist is going to spend about 5 minutes speaking from his or her own experience about how a postdoc might build upon the PhD. In other words, why take a postdoc position, and how he or she has or will use a postdoc as a stepping stone to the next stage in his or her career. And then we'll spend the rest of the session in a conversation with all of you using a Q&A format. So let's very quickly get the definition question answered. The National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation define a postdoctoral position as a temporary and defined period of mentored advanced training to enhance the professional skills and research independence needed to pursue his or her chosen career path. And now I'll introduce our panelists. And I'm going to do it in order. First here we have Derek Wainwright. Derek graduated with his PhD in 2009 from Loyola University Chicago. He's currently a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Chicago Brain Tumor Center. He was awarded the National Institute of Health's most prestigious career development award, the Pathway to Independence Award, which provides the leverage to transition into a tenure-track academic faculty position. He's published 20 manuscripts and/or book chapters in journals including Clinical Cancer Research, Journal of Biological Chemistry, and Expert Opinion on Emerging Drugs. Currently, he serves as the Vice President of the University Postdoctoral Association, Chair of the Public Affairs Committee, as well as a postdoctoral representative on the University of Chicago Institutional Research and Academic Career Development Award Committee. Andrew Campbell received his PhD from the University of Chicago in Geophysical Sciences in 1993. From 1993 to 1995, Andrew was a Carnegie Fellow in the Geophysical Laboratory of the Carnegie Institute of Washington, and from 1995 to 1997, he was a Senior Research Engineer at GE Super Abrasives General Electric Company. He came back as a research scientist to the University of Chicago, and then he was a faculty member at Maryland. He is now back with us and an associate professor in the Department of Geophysical Sciences. Next we have Catherine Poore. Catherine completed her undergraduate studies at Amherst College and graduated with majors in biology and chemistry. She moved to London for 4 years to play soccer and supported her soccer habit by working in a nanomedicine lab at the University of London. She came to the University of Chicago in 2006, where she completed a PhD in chemistry with Professor Xuan He, graduating in 2011. She stayed in the chemistry department and is now completing a postdoc with Professor Jared Lewis. Leah Johnson graduated with her PhD in 2006 from the University of California, Santa Cruz. She's a research professional in ecology and evolution. Her research interests are in statistical and mathematical biology, ecology, and epidemiology. In particular, she's interested in how individual behavior and local interactions between individuals and a population influence population-level patterns and statistical methodologies for inference of mechanistic models of biological systems. She also participates in a cooperative statistical consulting effort with Scry Research. And last but not least, we have William Leeds. He received his PhD from the University of Missouri in statistics in 2012. William has consulting experience with the United States Geological Survey, providing statistical support to ecologists. Currently, he is a postdoctoral scholar in the departments of statistics and geophysical sciences here at the University of Chicago. So we'll go ahead and get started and let Derek.
So thanks for that introduction that went way beyond what I actually deserve. So I've been a postdoc here for a little over 3.5 years, and I, like Miranda said, I did my PhD at Loyola, which is in Maywood here in Chicago. I don't know if you're familiar with the geography, but doing a postdoc just seemed natural because I'm interested in an academic research career. My field of focus is actually neuroimmuno-oncology, so I study immunotherapies for the treatment of brain tumors. My mentor is Dr. Matt Lesniak. He's a neurosurgeon and director of neurosurgical oncology here at University of Chicago. One of the ways I chose University of Chicago as my home as a postdoc is I asked myself not only what do I want to do for the rest of my life, and an academic research career was obviously one of those things, but what is important? Because in the context, everyone here is highly educated and very intelligent. In the context of where you take yourself, you also want to be successful. And so you have to ask, what is important? What do other people consider to be important? Because at least in my field, and the other panelists can represent their perspectives on their fields, but if you go into the biomedical research field, you have to do something that's important and that will be funded if you want to go into academic research. Because otherwise you won't get funded, and you'll always work for someone else, and you'll always be under someone else. And so as soon as I got here at the University of Chicago, I interacted a lot with my mentor, and he provided a lot of clinical specimens, actual brain tumors that were resected from his operating room. And our laboratory is right under the OR, so we were able to bring down the brain tumor specimens, and then I was able to do the mechanistic investigation. And that provided the foundation for a NIH, or National Institute of Health, Postdoctoral Fellowship, an independent postdoctoral fellowship, that I did about 2 years of research on before I applied for, as Miranda just said, the National Institutes of Health most difficult to get Career Development Award, the K-99, the Pathway to Independence Award. And essentially what it provides is financial leverage, so that it includes about 2 years of a mentored phase. Essentially, you're still a postdoc, but you get paid more. But also 3 years of about $250,000 a year, which you can take to any institution in the US. And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, that provides significant financial leverage for institutions that might not otherwise consider you, because you're bringing a lot of money with your name, and you're also showing that you can be successful and that you do something important. So I'm very happy with where I am. I'm very glad that I did the postdoc. Actually, I'm not looking forward to giving up my postdoc, because I've been very fortunate to do, like I wanted to do, something important that I think will help humanity, and that's why I came here in the first place. So, you know, keep that in mind going forward.
So as you may have figured from from the introduction, I was probably asked to serve on this panel because I can reflect on the postdoctoral experience from a number of different perspectives. Some years ago, like you, I was I assume that most of you are graduate students or postdocs, but anyway, like you, I was a graduate student here at Chicago, and I went from here to be a postdoc at the Carnegie Institution, which is a nonprofit, privately endowed research center that focuses on a small number of disciplines in science, and one of them happens to be mine, in geophysics. So although it may not be a big name, well, Carnegie I guess is always a big name, but although that particular research institution is not widely known to, you know, just anyone, in my area it's especially prominent. So that was an important component of my choice for why to do a postdoc there. After that, I went into industry and worked at General Electric for a few years. It was important to get that job to have had a variety of skills, and that was one of the things that I gained while I was a postdoc, is to do something a little bit different, similar to, but a little bit different from what I did for my PhD thesis. When you're selecting a postdoc, you've got a couple of choices. You can either become an even greater specialist in the sort of thing that you're doing already for a PhD, or you can take that opportunity to diversify a little bit. For me, it was a little bit of both, but mainly diversifying within my discipline. I was doing slightly different types of experiments, picked up slightly different skills, worked with a different group of people, and that helped me out in the job interview process. Because when you're going into an industrial job, maybe in the biomedical sciences it might be different, but in many other fields, they're looking for people who have skill. They're looking for people to do things in their industrial environment that are not really being done in an academic environment. So really what they're looking for are people who are trainable, people who've got a broad background and have a demonstrated diversity, of skills, so it's clear that they'd be able to continue to move and pick up new things as the years go by. The time scales on which you change projects in industry is much faster than in academics, so you need to be able to hop from one to the other. The broader your skill set, the better off you're able to do that sort of thing. In some industries, it might be different. After that, for personal reasons, a two-body problem issue, I left the job at GE and came back to Chicago as a research scientist, which is, it was similar enough to doing another postdoc that I can, think of it that way. That was a change of research direction for me. I mean, I wasn't doing research in industry. I was, it was more of a manufacturing facility that had an R&D, arm appended to it. And now I was back into more esoteric type of, geochemical, geophysical, planetary science type of research. That continued for 7 or 8 years, something like that. So that became a research professional track, sort of. And then eventually, I moved on into faculty positions. So I've been in your position, maybe looking forward to a postdoc. I've been a postdoc, maybe a couple of times, depending on how you look at it. And now I'm a faculty member, and I'm in the position of mentoring graduate students and helping them, giving them advice on deciding what postdoc to take, as well as hiring postdocs of my own. With regard to that, with selecting, what type of postdoc you would want to look for when you're about to graduate. I mean, there are many factors, and not one of them should override all. But something that is sometimes, I think, maybe overlooked, or the, a student might not be savvy enough or have the, the long-range vision to think about is, if you are intending to go into an academic position down the road, then somebody is going to be hiring you from a department where your subdiscipline is probably not already represented, right? That's why they would want to hire somebody in your field, because no one in their department already does that. So they're not going to be able to easily evaluate, really, how good are you compared to other very highly qualified applicants. To get that kind of thing, they appeal to the letters. Your letters of recommendation, maybe letters from other people in your field, but that letter of recommendation, at least one of them is going to come from your postdoctoral advisor or advisors. And the more prominent and widely known and eminent that person is, the more impact that letter is going to have. It's a factor to consider. If you do a postdoc with someone who's a brand new faculty member themselves, then they may not have the extent of connections or the stature in the field, their name's not as widely known, something to think about. So that's a piece of advice I give to students, when they ask. I've probably spoken enough. I'd be happy to answer any questions about that later.
Okay. Hi, my name is Kathy Poor. Just to reiterate a little bit about the introduction, I did my PhD here with Xuan He in the chemistry department, and I graduated in 2011. And then in March, I took a postdoc also in the chemistry department with Jared Lewis, who, as Andrew just mentioned, is actually a new faculty member, so it was not the perfect decision if I wanted to go into academics, but I've never wanted to go into academics. So I chose him for a variety of other reasons, which I'll get to. But why did I do a postdoc in the first place? If you want to go into academics in the chemistry field, it's required. You absolutely have to, unless you're just this amazing person like David Liu, who got hired straight out of graduate school and got tenure by the time he was 30 at Harvard, but he's a special case. So also in industry, it's pretty nearly required as well. I spoke to a bunch of people in industry, and they hadn't really heard of people who hadn't done postdocs before. And that's what I want to go into, is industry. I'd like to go into renewable fuels and chemicals. So that's where I'm headed, and I've always known that I wanted to go there. So the reason for doing a postdoc was that for my graduate studies, I did something that didn't exactly lead me into this industry that I want to go into. So I needed to switch fields a little bit and get more experience in a field that will be better for my applications when I'm applying to industry. I did send out a few applications straight out of graduate school and didn't get very far. So I did decide to come back and do a postdoc and switch my focus a little bit. And that was something that I could have done during graduate school, is actually switch a little bit and sort of lean into things that would give me a better opportunity to go straight into industry after graduate school. But I was having a lot of success with the projects I was working on and a lot of fun with the projects that I was working on, so I kind of kept my head down and did that, and then decided to do a postdoc afterwards. As I mentioned, Jared Lewis is a new faculty member here. He's a third-year professor, so he doesn't have a big name behind him, and he can't write me an amazing letter of recommendation that everybody will know his name when they see it. What he does have is a lot of industry connections into the industries that I want to go into, and the industries that I want to go into, as I said, are fairly small and fairly niche. And he knows a lot of people in them, and his postdoc advisor is sort of the godmother of it all. So that's really why I stuck around and worked with him and am working with him. And I could have gone somewhere else to learn the skills that I'm learning now, and maybe with a bigger name in the field, but as Andrew said, also I have a two-body problem, and I didn't want to go somewhere for a couple of years and then have to drag my husband somewhere else. So that's really my story for now.
I'm Leah. Which one's on? In the brief overview, you heard that I do mathematical biology. But that wasn't always the case. So when I did my undergraduate degree, I got a degree in physics. And I decided that I wanted to be a professor in particle astrophysics. So I went to graduate school intending to do particle astrophysics. And in my kind of midway through my second year of my graduate program in physics, I realized that the thing that had attracted me to physics had been understanding kind of real-world phenomena using math, but that I didn't care about particles. And this was, this is a pretty traumatic thing. Here you are in your third year of graduate school, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with my life? And then this is when I discovered that you can actually do math and biology together. And so I made a huge switch in the middle of my graduate career. So I switched from doing astrophysics and particle physics to doing ecology and infectious diseases. And 2.5 to 3 years of research to finish my PhD. I mean, I worked really hard, but you can't get, I think, a very good overall perspective of a field and really know what the big questions are, get to know people, and really start to understand where you want to make your contribution in that short of a period of time. So knowing that I still wanted to be an academic, I knew that I was going to need to do at least one postdoc and probably more. So that's really why I went ahead and originally did a postdoc. And I think that this is frequently a big reason to go and do a postdoc. I mean, the kind of general consensus is this, for both industry and academia, a lot of times it's pretty much a requirement to actually going into a more permanent position to go ahead and do a postdoctoral position. But there are some other things that are really important that you want to be able to get out of your postdoc too. And these are things that I didn't necessarily understand when I went to my postdoc. So, I got my PhD in 2006. My title is now a research professional because I'm no longer allowed to be a postdoc at the University of Chicago, since I'm more than 5 years out of my PhD. So there are certainly things along my time as a postdoc where I can say, I wish that I had known this about how the postdoc, what I was supposed to be getting out of a postdoc when I had started. I thought that what I needed to do is just do good science. And you do have to do good science, but unfortunately, that's not necessarily the thing that's going to move you into, not the only thing that's going to move you into an academic position. So I am, on the job market this year, and this depends on your field. But for instance, in math and statistics, a lot of times you might have 100 to 150 people applying for each faculty position. That's not very many people compared to what you get in biology. So for the biology positions I'm applying for, you're getting 300 to 800 people applying for every position. The probability of getting a position is low. And, coming out of graduate school, you don't really understand how low and the kinds of challenges that you need to overcome. And so then if you look at the people who get invited for interviews, I've been kind of keeping an eye out for the last couple of years. One thing that you notice is that search committees are very conservative. So people who get invited frequently are people who already have faculty positions, because they want to know that you have established your own research program. And so this is another thing that you get out of doing a postdoc. So one thing that's really important is be able to take the time to get an overview of the field and make sure that you are stepping out of the shadow of your PhD advisor and establishing yourself as an independent researcher. The other thing that, as Andy alluded to, is that it's really important that you're getting good letters, because when a committee is evaluating 800 applications, we're talking possibly on the order of 8,000 pages of material. They're not going to be reading everything. So you have to have something that makes you stick out. And a lot of times this is going to be the names on your, of the people who are writing your letters. But it's also about whether or not you've gotten a chance to meet the people who happen to be on the committee. If the committee member recognizes your name from somewhere, this is a big step into at least getting to the first cut. They might decide that you're not a good fit after that, but if to stick out in 800 people, somebody has to know who you are. So this is the thing that I think that I really didn't know and I didn't take advantage of when I was trying to do my postdocs, is that it's really important to find a mentor who is going to be your advocate. You want a mentor who doesn't necessarily just view you as an employee. You really want to be their protege. You want to be the person that they're going to be, you want to be working for the type of person who's going to be going out and mentioning you to their colleagues, who's going to be introducing you to people, who's going to be inviting you to give talks, who's going to be suggesting you to other people when they are asked to give talks. And I think it's hard to know that somebody's like that up front. But I do think that it's important. And certainly it was something that I really didn't realize. I also have this two-body problem. So when I took my first postdoc in England, I went with my now husband to a place that I knew almost nobody. And 2 weeks after I arrived, my new mentor told us that he was leaving academia to join a sports betting company. I mean, kind of bonkers type of things. And because I had a two-body problem, I stayed. And so for 3 years, I was in a place where I knew nobody, I had nobody to introduce me to anybody else. And you can't make the kinds of connections that are really vital. So I think that's something to really look out for. And things are moving ahead. I'm starting to get interviews and this kind of thing. So it's you can make it work without having those type of things in your mentor, but I think it's really difficult, and I think it's the thing to be really going for in order to try to make it in academia. It's underappreciated, and that's my 2 cents.
I'm Bill Leeds. I probably have a little bit less time to have reflected on the benefits of a postdoc versus other options than maybe other members of the panel. I finished up my PhD this past August in statistics, and I am coming from a
recording maybe.
And so I actually do have a little different perspective, though, because statistics has historically been a field where it's really not necessary to do a postdoc to actually land a academic job at a strong research university. It's been possible even 10 years ago that you could come straight from graduate school and end up at a top university and be doing research. And when I started, I went to graduate school specifically knowing the advisor that I wanted to work with. And I also had this in mind that I potentially wouldn't need to do a postdoc. And then about a year into graduate school, the financial crisis hit. Universities went on a hiring freeze, and very quickly it became almost a requirement to have a postdoc to get into a research position. Whereas in industry or government positions, it's still not necessarily as likely. That said, I still actually think that there are a lot of benefits for even people that are going into any sort of government research position or any sort of position to get a postdoc in statistics, for instance. I had faculty offers, but whenever I went to some of these departments, you will realize that one nice thing about a postdoc is a transition to actually have your research agenda set up when you actually do eventually head to a research university, instead of finishing up your dissertation either in May or in August, heading to the new university that you're going to work with, and then all of a sudden getting courses ready and your committee requirements and everything else. So you do have more requirements as a postdoc than you did at a graduate student, but you have far less, I think, than you would as even an assistant professor at a university. And so that's been a benefit. I think there's also the benefit of who you get to write your letters of recommendation. So one of my reasons for coming here is that I had the opportunity to work with a geophysicist who is a younger geophysicist, but I'm working with a statistician who's one of the top people in the area of research I have. So now when I look for faculty jobs, between him and my graduate advisor, I have two of the top people in my field to be able to write me letters of recommendation. But in some ways, I actually have pretty similar research background to what Leah might do. So I work with atmospheric scientists, ecologists, and ocean scientists, and I try to use statistical inference on different mechanistic models. So for me, networking and working in interdisciplinary environments, very, very important. And so as a part of the position that I have at the University of Chicago, I work with a center on climate and energy policy, where I work with computer scientists, economists, climate scientists, and other statisticians. And then another half of my time I spend working with a statistical network that does research in atmosphere and ocean sciences. And so there are several different nodes set up throughout the country, so I can actually travel and work with statisticians and atmospheric scientists and ocean scientists at Duke or the University of Washington or some of these other areas. And that's critical to me in the sense that when you're a graduate student, you do have an opportunity to network with some of the people that your advisor works with closely, but you don't have this opportunity to branch out, to contact people that maybe even your postdoc advisor doesn't work with, but you have his recommendation. If you get that sort of freedom, you can go out and contact other people that you might be able to work on a project with. So now I know when I start looking at research universities, I don't just have a small group of people I can work with. I can go on my interviews and I can talk about different sorts of people that I'm going to start working with the second that I take a position here. And another benefit to being a postdoc is one can think of it as a 2+ year experience, where with this networking, I do go to other universities to give department seminars and things like that. So by the time you're actually in the interview process, you might know a lot of people at some of the departments that are hiring, so you have a huge leg up in that regard.
So before we open it up to questions, I just wanted to ask the panel whether anything that you've heard, if any of you have any additional comments before we go to the audience.
I mean, I would just reiterate this point that Bill was making about for interdisciplinary work. It's especially important, I think, that the postdoc gives you a really unique opportunity to build these bridges across disciplines that you wouldn't get in a traditional PhD program pretty much anywhere. And then, again, you know, this point about the more people you know, the better chance you have when you're one of 800, I think is really it's really important. So yeah, so then, you know, not all advisors are as good about making sure that you get these opportunities to get out and do seminars and these type of things. So finding that out ahead of time is, I think, very important.
So questions? I'm going to bring the microphone over because this is being filmed. I'm not much of a talk show host.
So it seems that it's beneficial to do a postdoc even if you're thinking of going to industry afterwards. I'm happy to hear that. I'm not sure myself if I want to stay in academia or going for faculty job. I have heard from other people though that for a lot of industry jobs it might not be beneficial to do a postdoc because they are looking for younger people, and the younger you are, the more closely you are to the newest ways of learning the things in grad school, for example. So what do you think, what's the general, is there a general hint you can give me?
I would be surprised if 1 or 2 years makes a difference in your age.
Right.
I think that maybe that becomes more important if you're a long-term, research scientist track or a research professional of some sort. Then maybe some industry position might seem to be a better fit with someone who's fresh out of school and not as committed to a specific line of research or technique that they use. That's possible, yeah. But short-term postdoc, I would not think would make the difference.
I'm thinking like 4 or 5 years, maybe 2 postdocs.
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, eventually, yeah. Yeah, I think that I can't see much of a downside to doing a short-term postdoc aside from possibly opportunity costs or, having a lower income for a couple of years. I mean, that is something to think about. If you have a high-paying industry job, offered, do the math. Yeah, what will that postdoc gain you? Yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Can I follow up?
Yeah, go ahead.
That's actually a really good question. So when I finished my PhD, I applied to several biomedically oriented research positions. And I was offered several positions, but what I found out quickly was that they're interested in highly skilled technicians. If you have a postdoc, that puts you in a completely different category, at least in my field. I can't speak for any other field. But they actually didn't want any postdoctoral experience, and they explicitly stated or asked why I had started a postdoc already. And of course my answer was, well, I had to do something because I had nothing else to do. But they didn't want any postdoctoral experience because they were specifically looking for essentially a lab rat. So consider that when you're thinking about these industry positions. And again, it's probably field specific, but in my field, if I were to go into that position right after grad school, I would never, well, I don't want to say never, but I wouldn't be going for the directorship opportunities that I'm potentially setting myself up for, if I transitioned into industry later.
Another question about, I guess, transitioning from an academic track to maybe an industrial track or something outside of the academy. You spoke a little bit about this already, but in terms of technical expertise that you might, for example, get through doing a postdoc, I'm sort of wondering how much one should maybe, because it's sort of something one thinks about in graduate school a little bit, we sort of learn the skills that we need to complete our specific dissertation as opposed to simply training to become an expert in one, say, sort of assay or one sort of analysis. And I'm sort of wondering, I guess my question is sort of about breadth versus specificity. In other words, if you're, say, thinking about an industrial career, is it more trying to learn a specific skill very well, so you really are the expert that maybe a firm wants to hire to do NMR or whatever it is? Or are there firms that perhaps, and this probably depends on the industry, but looking maybe for breadth and flexibility? In other words, they want to hire someone who they can train or just shows like flexibility and motivation.
From my experience, it's been more a little bit of a middle ground from what you said. but definitely more of an expert in one area. And it also depends upon the industry. If you're looking, I've looked at some big pharma jobs, which I absolutely don't want to take, but I've just looked to see what's out there, and they're more interested in somebody who can do what they want and just come in there and do it, and maybe, as Derek said, like a little bit more of a lab rat to be the expert on that. The jobs that I want to go into are small industrial jobs at startup companies, and they're going to want somebody who can think a little bit more on their feet and do things a little bit more with a little bit more variety. So I think that there's a happy medium, and it really depends upon the industry. I've gone to a lot of career things where people from the ACS, the American Chemical Society or something, just stand up and talk about, well, you're so smart, and they just want people who are smart and who can think on their feet. It's a bunch of crap. It really is. It's not, you're not going to hire someone just because they're smart. They need somebody to do something for them. So.
Well, I think there are a couple of cases where they're wanting to hire people that are smart. So I know a bunch of people who do finance. And a lot of hedge funds, although this is a dangerous place to be these days, but a lot of hedge funds, these type of places, just really want somebody with a PhD who knows how to learn and who is clever, but who wants to try something new, and then they train them up. And at least one place I know of actually does something that are kind of like graduate classes, in order to then kind of in their first and second year of their work there, to kind of weed out the people who are smart in the right way than those that aren't. So certainly in those type of jobs, it's about being smart. And then I have a good friend of mine who actually works for Facebook now. Like, he was at a national labs, and now he works for Facebook. And he's a statistician. And in that case, it's again more about having a broad range of, in this case, quantitative skills that make you attractive as somebody who is willing to try something new. So I think it really does depend a lot on the particular thing you want to do. So unfortunately, it depends on what you want to do. Sorry.
I agree. Yeah, those are good answers, and they illustrate the difficulty in generalizing, an answer to that question. It's going to depend on the person, the field, the industry, and the specific company involved. In my own case, as I said in the introductory remarks, the job that I was hired to do in industry really did not rely at all on any of the experimental, methods that I was trained in as a postdoc or as a graduate student. I mean, there were parallels, of course, but really it was completely different work with completely different applications. It was more like the scientific knowledge that I had, the understanding of how materials work, at high pressures and high temperatures, and physical properties of minerals or other materials, and chemical reactions under extreme conditions. It was really the background knowledge, as well as a demonstrated ability to pick up different experimental methods or different, manufacturing methods, or, right? So it was, in my case, they were looking for sort of a jack of all trades who had the right sort of scientific, knowledge. And I wasn't hired just to do, one method over and over and over again. Yeah. But obviously, that's just one of many possibilities.
Just as kind of a follow-up to that, if you are interested in industry, how did you guys go about pinpointing like what skills or expertise you thought would be needed in your field, and like to pick your postdoc based on that? Like, if one doesn't really have as much of an idea what opportunities are available?
That would imply a level of organization and forethought that I did not have.
How did you get your postdoc, I guess?
Through the connections of my postdoctoral advisor. Actually, the industry came to us and was, identified identified that population of scientists as having, the right skill set or fundamental knowledge and understanding, even though the actual techniques were different, and invited a bunch of us postdocs to apply. So that's how that happened.
For me, for the skills that I wanted to define as needing to obtain during my postdoc, I've looked at the job descriptions of places that I'd be interested in working, basically. And for me, it's a tough call between doing something that you love. I loved what I did in my graduate work, but it's taking me. I could do that in big pharma and and hopefully be very successful there, but that's not the end result that I want. So I'm sort of taking a chance and learning something new, hoping to get to the industry that I feel most passionate about. So.
Hi. So I keep hearing from a lot of faculty members and at networking events that it's really not recommended to stay in the same institution or come back to your alma mater. And it's always better to change institutions at every step of your career, as in, you know, grad school, postdoc, and then faculty membership. So can you evaluate what are the advantages and disadvantages of staying in one institution if you really like this particular person's research and I really want to work on it, versus, oh, I want to expose myself to more, you know, different scientific environments, so I need to change institution?
Sure. So in my own personal case, I did transition from Loyola to University of Chicago. So I can't speak to staying at an institution, but I can tell you what I've heard. So you're right, most faculty members will tell you you should transition from whatever institution that you're at while you're doing your PhD, and then at your postdoc go somewhere else. Because what can happen is you can fall into a rut where you are no longer considered someone that's becoming independent, which is the whole point of the postdoc, to someone that needs this particular mentor to be successful. So one of the ways around that, if you want to stay at the institution, because University of Chicago is a world-class university. When I applied for my Pathway to Independence Award, it was unanimous across the study section that reviewed my grant. Everyone thinks that this is a top-tier university, and it is. One of the ways that you can get around not leaving University of Chicago is to really realign what you're studying. So if, for example, you're studying chemistry, and then all of a sudden you're studying some analog of chemistry with a small derivation, it's not going to look like you're realigning to learn a new field, to gain a new skill set. And that's one of the points of doing a postdoc, is to learn these new skills, to become a leader. So you can stay at University of Chicago and you can get around that, but you have to keep in mind that they're looking for the leaders, you know, and they're looking for people that can distinguish themselves from their former mentors.
Yeah, I guess I have to address this since I've moved to Hyde Park 3 times now. But I never really stayed on from one position to the next, right? I started off as a graduate student and went off and did other things, and then eventually, you know, the opportunities were here. Well, I guess I came back for personal reasons and ended up getting a job here on campus again. And then I went off and became a faculty member elsewhere and got hired back. But again, it was a completely different position. I do think it probably made it more difficult for me to be viewed, you know, by the department as someone who's distinct, and, you know, I might have looked less exciting to some because I was so familiar. But on the other hand, they hired me back, so maybe it was exciting. Yeah, so I guess I'd like to know the answer to your question too, I guess. But in general, as a faculty member, I would certainly advise, you know, undergraduates to go elsewhere for graduate school and graduate students to go elsewhere for postdoc, and postdocs to move on to, you know, greater things, you know, as a rule of thumb. But, you know, life doesn't always take you that way.
In one specific instance, some grants that I was looking into as a postdoc, they really frowned upon staying in the same institution. And so I just didn't apply for them, having done my PhD here and stayed on. So that is definitely a sort of an institutionalized view that you really want to change places of study. As I mentioned, I did it for, I am changing my type of study, and I can learn new skills here in this different lab than I had as my graduate work. And as I said, like, I feel like for academics, it's much more important to change your institution, less so for industry. And that, obviously, industry is where I want to go. So.
Yeah, because as we've previously mentioned, you do want to be able to get these letters from people in kind of a broad variety of places. And if you were to not only stay in the same place, if you were to imagine staying in the same lab, then all of a sudden your postdoc and your PhD advisor are the same person. And instead of getting 2 different letters, you're getting 1. So it could be really important, I think, to make sure that you make a big enough switch so that you can get a broader range of people who know who you are.
I kind of would also add into there, I think there's this tendency that some people will go to other universities, but they still end up working in a very narrow. One thing I've noticed is that it'll be frowned on to stay at a university and work with somebody completely different, yet at the same time, you go to a completely different university and work with your advisor's former student that graduated 20 years ago. It's a really good opportunity to learn from somebody who's an expert in their field that maybe is at least tangentially related to what you study, but you can really broaden your knowledge in the discipline that way.
And get a new perspective, because
Yep.
yeah, if you work with somebody who does something the exact same way as your advisor, you're not going to get a different perspective on your field, which I think is really important in figuring out where you want your research to be as an independent researcher.
Hi, I think this might be a really pessimistic way of interpreting Leah's numbers, but it seems that particularly given the current economic situation, even if one is bright and talented and goes to a phenomenal institution like the U of C for their postdoc, a job in the academic sector is not necessarily a guarantee. So do you have any advice about how and when to hedge your bets? I mean, do you look for a postdoc that maybe is not exactly what you would do if you wanted to go into academia, but could potentially lead to an industry career? Do you try to find time on the side of your projects to learn some additional skills that might make you marketable? Do you wait until you see whether you get the kick-ass K99 and then, you know, start training for something else? I mean, fine, this is a pessimistic view, but I just sort of wanted your opinions about these sorts of things.
I unfortunately have to say I don't think it's a pessimistic view, because if you just look at the number of people that your advisor is training, and imagine everybody's training that many people, but they're only one job, right? So on average, you'd say there's probably 20 or 30 people per position type of thing. So in a lot of the biological sciences. So I don't think you're being pessimistic. Now, how you hedge your bets, I think, is entirely has to do with what your loss function is. Like how you feel about being paid poorly, for instance, because postdocs get paid pretty poorly in most fields. In some cases, they get paid worse than the graduate students in that field. And so kind of long-term economic reasons, you know, you have to decide, you know, how much you're willing to take of that. There are certainly certain skills that are going to be able to get you a job regardless. I think that, you know, good quantitative skills will never do you wrong type of thing. I think there are enough fields where you could do things with the kind of quantitative skills that you learn as a scientist. You know, my loss function, I've wanted to be an academic since I was 12 or something, right? So, you know, it's my balance as far as how long I'm willing to kind of keep at this is probably a little extreme. I know some people who are more extreme who did postdocs for 8 to 10 years before getting a faculty position. And then I know people who decided that after 2 years, it just wasn't, they decided that the academic lifestyle wasn't for them, because there is a lot of stuff. I mean, you don't get to necessarily just do research as an academic. You're doing a lot of other things like teaching and administration, and so if you really want to just do research, I mean, a lot of times the way that you decide to go is like a more permanent kind of research position. So I think it's all about individual choice as far as what you're willing to trade off and when you're willing to cut your losses. And certainly you can always gain skills that will be applicable someplace, I'm sure. But I mean, that's just, you know, I've been doing this for a while now, so I've been thinking along these lines for a couple of years. You know, when am I going to say, that's it, and do something else?
Okay, can I follow that up? So, no. So, no, I'm glad that you asked that question because there is a lot of financial uncertainty and it's leading to a lot of pessimism. And I don't want anyone in this room, graduate student-wise, to be pessimistic about your future because, you know, we all have a host of different experiences and it's hard, but please keep it in perspective that it's hard in any path that you take right now, either in industry or in academics. So, you know, the glass is always half full, you know, kind of thing. I mean, I am very, very fortunate in that I got a postdoctoral fellowship and now I'm getting a K99. Part of the reason for it is that I started out with a strategy. And like I told you at the beginning, I asked myself, what is going to be considered important? What is the NIH funding? Now, not all of you are going to be funded by the NIH, so you have to ask, you know, how are you going to demonstrate success? But, you know, formulate your strategy now as far as, you know, what's going to take you to the next level? How are you going to transition there? Now, if you have to transit through a postdoc for a couple of years, I don't think that's a bad thing. And let me give you a little bit more of my background. So, as Miranda said, I'm vice president of the Postdoc Association here at University of Chicago. And it's so valuable as far as leadership experience, as far as networking possibilities. I've met so many different professors. I'm sorry, we've never met, but I've met a lot of different professors here at University of Chicago, and my network has expanded exponentially because of it. It's one of the reasons that I got the K99. They actually commented on he's actively involved both at the local level and nationally, and I'm not just doing it to get a K99. I like doing what I'm doing. You know, I love my research, but I don't want to be a lab rat, right? So it helps me to stay social, and it helps me to develop those skills that, you know, I have been approached by some immunotherapy-based pharmaceutical companies. So in the future, even though I want to stay in academics, if I don't make the cut, you know, there's always that possibility that this broad experience of leadership opportunities as well as my research experience will lead me into that industry position. So, you know, it takes time, but don't get pessimistic. It's a hard road, but you're at University of Chicago. You wouldn't be here if you hadn't already been down the road, and you're okay traveling down that road. So stick with it, stay determined. Perseverance is much more important than talent. Keep that in mind, and you can go anywhere.
One or two more questions.
Hi, thanks. The differing views, we can all agree that it's rough trying to be an academic or even in industry as a scientist. So, you know, there's been lots of talk of how do we make the system better. Yeah, we can teach graduate students to network and things, but still there's only X number of jobs. You might be able to get one of them, but we're training, you know, only 20% of the people end up doing what they were trained for. So are there other models, especially if you guys, faculty or future faculty, staffing more permanent positions in your labs, that sort of thing? Because at the end of the day, no matter how much we network, 80% of scientists are not going to be scientists, you know, at the end of the day.
So he was asking, I think that we were having some trouble hearing, so he was asking if we had any ideas about how to change the model to kind of address these disparities whereby, you know, that 80% of the people who train as scientists are not going to be able to become faculty or get kind of permanent jobs in science. I think this is a big question and a big difficulty at this point. I mean, certainly one of the things that probably needs to happen that would be useful is to have more non-faculty type research positions instead of the way that things are set up, relying on cheap graduate student labor to do everything. It's a very different way of viewing research, I guess. But I mean, I don't know that there are really good. I don't know that there are good solutions at this point for the stuff that I've read and looked at. I don't know that anybody
has really good ideas.
Can I just chime in? Sorry. So I am chair of the Public Affairs Committee here at University of Chicago, and I'm also on the Advocacy Committee for the National Postdoctoral Association. We are interacting with NIH, who's the largest biomedical funder in the nation, the National Institutes of Health. They just reviewed the postdoctoral experience and graduate student experience, and they're formulating an opinion and actively going through changes to change the graduate student experience from a biomedical standpoint. I can't speak to the physical sciences. They want to shorten the graduate student stay to 5 years. They'll do that by cutting off funding for any graduate students that go past 5 years. Most graduate students that are biomedically funded are supported through R01s. They're no longer going to allow those graduate students to be supported on the R01s past the 5-year limit. The other way that they're changing it for the postdocs is that they're trying to increase the amount of career development awards, as well as increase the amount of training grants for postdocs. This all takes time, and unfortunately, we're in the transition phase, all of us in this room. So we may see the beginning, or we may see the end of that bell curve going into effect. But it's starting to take place, and as a couple of us were talking about before this kind of symposium, you know, it's a difficult time. There's about 89,000 postdocs in the US, and there's about 1,000 faculty positions for us. So again, go back to the strategy, formulate your strategy, and find out what's important, what's going to get you to that next step, because a lot of people don't think strategy before they go into a postdoc or they apply for that industry position, right? I mean, have you thought about your strategy until now? Because if you don't have one, you're really putting yourself at risk of being in a postdoc for 5 to 6 years and wondering how you're going to get out of this position. So that's how I would respond.
All right, one last question.
I just have a very quick question about the industry experience. So I've heard the saying that if you are trying to pursue an academic position, eventually the industry will just serve as a distraction or something. So I was wondering, what kind of industry experience does it have a positive or negative effects if you are trying to end up in an academic position? Yeah, thank you.
In my case, it was certainly a negative impact on reaching a faculty position. There might be fields in which this is not the case, but in the earth sciences and in, I think, many other physical sciences, once you're gone to industry, it's more difficult to get back. First of all, switching from, you know, a reasonably well-paid job, and then going where I worked 8 until 5 and had weekends off, and then going back to, you know, a research scientist track job where I worked much longer hours for about half the pay. That was a difficult decision to make, but I made it for reasons that didn't have that much to do with, you know, with the career, obviously. There were other factors involved. But moreover, that gap in the publication record and the productivity takes a while to work off. The industry experience is considered valuable now in, you know, environments like this, where I'm maybe considered to be better able to give advice to my graduate students or what have you. But it certainly wasn't a factor in hiring me. I think that from the standpoint of being hired as a faculty member, it's your research, your published research record that you're going to have to stand on. And if there's a gap in that record, then that's not going to work for you, but against you. Yeah.
I'm actually going to disagree with that completely. Okay. Not from a personal perspective, right, obviously, but just I went to a career thing in the BSD. There was a panel just from the, I'm sorry, the BMB, which has 20 faculty members, something like that. And they were able to find 3 faculty members just out of the 20 or so that had come from industry. And in the, more personally, the chemistry department, we, within the last 5 years, just hired a new faculty member who worked at IBM and had tons of publications while he was at IBM, and has come on and received tenure within 5 years of being here, and he's doing really well. So that's all that I know about it, is just those examples.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, everything you said makes perfect sense, but I know that these guys were publishing while they were at industry, and that
So that's an important point, right. Some places, a few companies still have, actually, I don't even know if IBM still has that. It used to be that large corporations would have research facilities where they would continue to do basic fundamental research that was publishable. You know, that was not the circumstance that I was in when I was in industry, and some of those places have closed down. But that's right, it's going to be field specific, very field specific, I think, yeah.
And then you also have these kind of places that are quasi-industry, or kind of in between, like the national labs, right, where you're outside of academia, but you're still working in something that's kind of like an academic environment, and you're doing frequently a reasonable amount of publication, or you're maybe in a think tank, and again, you know, things that aren't classified, you're able to go ahead and publish on. So I think if you know that you're wanting to eventually get into an academic position, if you take an industry position in between, knowing, I think that's important, is to know, if you know that it's where you want to go, it's important to keep up the publication rate. Even if it's not quite as fast, keeping in the game, going to conferences, making sure people know who you are, that type of thing, I think are key.
And I did none of that while I was at it. I didn't expect, you know, it wasn't a strategy to go back into academics. I was happy in industry. I wasn't going to conferences and running,